A fugitive running from his past. A mysterious alien with a deadly secret. And a monstrous storm beast threatening to tear them apart. With every step, the danger escalates. Can Rhys survive long enough to unlock the truth? And will he be able to resist the fire building between them? The chaos is just beginning. Subscribe now and never miss a pulse-pounding moment. Rylan Kade was not a man built for peace. He'd spent 6 weeks on Dravethis convincing himself otherwise, but as he sprawled on a lumpy pile of scavenged hides inside his makeshift camp, he knew the truth. Quiet was just the universe's way of screwing with you before the hammer dropped. The camp, a hollowed-out spore wound patched with whatever didn't stink too bad, was a testament to his knack for surviving on scraps. Outside, the crimson fungal flats stretched like a giant's twitching skin, rippling under a sky that churned with storms growling nonsense in voices he swore sounded like his old crew. "Miss you idiots," he muttered, flipping a fungal slab on a heat stone. "Bet you'd hate this dump even more than me." Dravethis wasn't exactly a vacation spot. The air smelled like damp rot and something faintly sour, and those towering sporeworms, bulbous, venous sacs the size of drop pods, kept hissing glowing mist like they were gossiping about him. He'd picked this backwater planet in the vortex shroud because no one sane would look for a fugitive here, not after he'd torched a syndicate slave rig and gotten his crew killed in the blowback. 6 weeks, no bounty drones, he said, slicing into his dinner with a jagged blade. Maybe I finally outsmarted those corporate jackasses. Or maybe I'm just delusional. Flip a coin. He didn't get to finish that thought. His blade snagged on something hard in the sporeworm's wall. A fleshy orb, no bigger than his fist, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "What the hell's this?" he grumbled, prying it loose. The veil seed popped free with a wet squelch, and before he could blink, it flared. A keening wail ripped through the air, loud enough to rattle his teeth and make his ears pop. "Oh, hell, what did I do now?" he yelped, stumbling back as the orb throbbed in his hand, warm and slick like a living thing. The ground shivered under his boots, and the sporeworms around him hissed louder, like they were pissed he'd woken something up. He didn't have time to figure it out. The wind turned mean, sharp and fast, carrying a swarm of flesh wind lashers straight for him. They weren't your friendly neighborhood breeze. These were fungal tendrils riding the gusts, barbed mouths snapping like piranhas on a bender. "Not today, you windy freaks," Rhys shouted, swinging his blade as one lashed out. It coiled around his thigh, barbs sinking deep. Hot, stinging pain shot through his leg, and he cursed loud enough to wake the dead. Another tendril whipped across his chest, pressing tight against his ribs, squeezing the air out of him in a ragged gasp. "Okay, ow. Personal space," he wheezed, hacking at it with sloppy, desperate swings. The thing didn't budge, just kept gnawing, and he felt the damp heat of his own blood soaking his pants. He was about 2 seconds from becoming Lasher Chow when the mist parted and she showed up. A figure strode through the haze, tall, lethal, and drop-dead gorgeous in a way that made his brain short-circuit even with his leg half-eaten. Zarene, though he didn't know her name yet, was a vision carved from dusk, her skin a deep indigo that shimmered with iridescent flecks like stars caught in twilight. Her eyes blazed like emerald flames, swirling with heat, and her jet-black tendrils of hair rippled like they had a mind of their own, glowing faintly at the tips. She moved with a predator's grace, staff in hand, coiled energy crackling along its length. "You've torn the veil, frail one," she purred, her voice a low hum laced with thunder, and before Rhys could crack a dumb joke, she swung. The staff lashed out, shredding the lashers in bursts of sizzling light. Tendrils dropped like cut strings, and Rhys hit the ground, gasping. She didn't wait for him to catch his breath. She grabbed his wrist and yanked him up hard. Her fingers, smooth and warm like storm-heated stone, clamped down, sending a jolt through his arm that prickled every nerve he owned. The heat from her skin bled into him, sharp and electric, and for a dumb second, he forgot the pain in his leg. Then she stepped closer, her grip sliding up to his shoulder, pressing firm against his collarbone. Her warmth sank deep, coiling low in his gut, a mix of sting and something he didn't want to name. His breath hitched, and he rasped, "Careful, beauty, I'm flammable." Her lips twitched, barely a smirk, and she leaned in, her face inches from his. "Your pulse sings, mortal," she murmured, her voice buzzing against his skin. "It calls to me." He blinked, brain scrambling. Thanks?" "I think," he managed, half laughing through the ache. She didn't laugh back, just stared, those emerald eyes pinning him like a bug on a board. "You're mine to wield now," she added, letting go so fast he nearly face-planted. The veil seed pulsed in his hand, and he held it up, grinning crookedly. "This thing? I'm no wizard, lady, just a guy trying not to die." She didn't look impressed, just spun her staff and stepped back, scanning the fungal flats like she expected more trouble. "Trouble you've brought," she said, her tendrils swaying as the wind kicked up again. "That wail, it summons Thraxis. My clan scourge. It hungers for all." Ree squinted at her, then at the orb. "Great, I'm a cosmic punching bag now. What's a Thraxis, and why's it my problem?" She glared, and he swore her eyes flared brighter. "A storm beast," she said, "loose to purge the weak. You woke it. You'll help me kill it, or you'll feed it." He snorted, leaning on his blade like it was a crutch. "Wow, you're a real charmer. Any chance I can opt out?" "No," she said flatly, and he sighed, rubbing his face. "Figures. 6 weeks of peace, and I trip over the galaxy's worst alarm clock." He glanced at his leg. Blood still oozed, but the lasher bites weren't deep enough to kill him yet. Small victories. Zarene didn't seem to care about his whining. She just stood there, all indigo curves and deadly poise, waiting for him to move. He couldn't help it, he grinned. "Guess I'm bait now, Storm Eyes. Where we headed?" She didn't answer right away, just tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she hadn't decided to smash yet. "My kin cast me out for sparing blood they craved," she said, almost to herself, her voice dipping low. "A flaw they couldn't bear." Ree paused, his grin fading. "Yeah? My crew died for my stunt. Blew a syndicate gig to free some folks. Left me nothing but scars." He tapped his chest, where a faded burn mark peeked from his torn shirt. "Guess we're both bad at picking sides." Her eyes flickered, something softer there for half a heartbeat, then gone. "Move," she said, turning toward the fungal sprawl. "The beast won't wait." He limped after her, wincing as his leg throbbed. "You're all sunshine, huh?" he muttered, but he kept pace, the veil seed warm in his grip. The spore worms hissed behind them, mist curling like fingers in the air, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Dravethis was watching. Zarene's tendrils glowed faintly as she walked, cutting through the haze, and Ree caught himself staring, less at the danger, more at her. "Not my smartest day," he said under his breath, hefting his blade as they pushed deeper into the red, breathing wild. The fungal flats pulsed underfoot, and somewhere in the distance, a low rumble answered the seed's call. Rylan Kade slogged through the fungal sprawl of Dravethis, the veil seed a hot coal in his fist, its pulse thumping like a second heart. The ground sucked at his boots, a wet, greedy grip, and a low growl rumbled in the distance. Thraxis, stalking closer, its presence a storm pressing on his chest. Zarene led the way, her indigo form slicing through the haze, tendrils swaying with that faint, unearthly shimmer. "Hurry, mortal," she snapped, her voice a deep purr edged with lightning, cutting through the damp air. "Or I'll leave you for the beast." "Leave me?" Ree huffed, his bitten leg pulsing with pain. "Thought we were a team now, Storm Eyes, partners in chaos." She didn't turn, just kept moving toward the breathway, a grotesque tunnel pulsing like a living artery, its fleshy walls twitching with a slow, hungry rhythm. The air around it thickened, heavy with a sour, earthy musk that coated his tongue. "This thing looks like it's waiting to swallow us whole," he said, peering into the shadowed maw. "You sure it's not a one-way trip?" "It takes us to more vein," Zarene said, her staff striking the ground with a faint sizzle. "Thraxis hunts there. We face it, or it finds us." Her emerald flame eyes darted to the seed, then locked on him, sharp and unyielding. "You stirred it awake," she said, her words a blade in his gut. My clan's scourge, a storm beast forged to devour the weak. I spared those they'd have fed it, and they banished me for that sin. Eli smilked, limping nere. Yeah, I burned a slave rig, lost my crew to the flames. Loyalty's a cruel bastard. His voice roughened, cracked with old grief, and her tendrils paused, her gaze flickering, soft, just for a breath, a wound mirrored in her eyes. Kin betrays deeper than enemies, she murmured, and the air between them tightened, heavy with unspoken scars. Then the breathway shuddered, a wet groan rolling through its walls, and Reed braced himself. Right, enough bonding. Let's not piss off the meat tube, he said, stepping toward it. They plunged inside, and the tunnel closed around them like a fist. The walls glistened, slick with a warm, sticky film, rippling with every breath of wind, and the floor sank underfoot with a soft, greedy pull. The heat clung, a damp weight that plastered his shirt to his skin, and a low, throbbing hum buzzed in his ears. Feels like we're crawling through a gut, Reem muttered, ducking a dangling flap of flesh that dripped a sharp, acrid bead. Hope it doesn't digest us. Zarene didn't answer, her staff casting a faint glow, but he caught a twitch at her lips, barely there, a crack in her armor. The passage squeezed tighter, walls pressing in, and Ree's leg buckled mid-step. He slipped, boots sliding on the slick floor, and crashed into Zarene with a grunt. She caught him, her arm hooking around his waist, her chest slamming into his. Her heat blazed through his shirt, a molten rush that seared his ribs, and her fingers dug into his side, deep and fierce, pressing into the muscle with a bruising grip. His breath snagged, a sharp, reeling surge spiking through him as her curves crushed against him. Hard, unrelenting, her skin a furnace that sent a tremor down his spine. Her tendrils grazed his neck, soft and charged, and her breath brushed his ear, a low hum that coiled tight in his core. Careless wretch, she growled, her voice a rumble that shook him, but her grip slid lower, claws raking his hip, slow and deliberate, igniting a raw, pulsing ache he couldn't bury. You're too much, he rasped, half choking on a laugh, and her eyes blazed, pinning him with a look that dared him to break. Rise, she hissed, but her hand stayed, pressing harder, and he felt her power wrap around him, her heat sinking deeper, a wild, tugging burn that made his heart slam. Or what? He shot back, grinning through the haze. You'll pin me till I beg? Her lips parted, a glint of danger flashing in her gaze, and she shoved him upright, stepping back. You'd shatter, she said, but her tendrils trailed his arm as she turned. Light, electric, and he bit back a groan, shaking it off. Worth a gamble, he muttered, limping after her. The breathway dumped them onto more vein, and the shift slammed into him. The ground steamed with tar pits, dark and churning, their surface bubbling with a slow, guttural pop that stank of sulfur and ruin. Fungal thickets loomed ahead, their stalks swaying with an eerie, rustling murmur, and the sky flared with jagged streaks, storms clawing at each other with savage fury. Oh, charming, Rhys said, wiping sweat from his brow. Dravethis' meaner twin. Where's our pal? Zarene scanned the horizon, her staff humming louder. Thraxis roams here, she said. We summon it, or it takes us. He hefted the veil seed, its pulse racing. This thing's got a voice, he said, feeling its buzz in his throat. Let's see. He pressed it to his mouth and roared. Hey, you ugly son of a bitch. The seed turned his shout into a sonic wave, rippling across the tar, and the pits shivered in answer. Well, shit. He grinned, but the grin faded. A roar tore through the air, deep and visceral, and Thraxis burst from the thickets. It was a tempest made flesh, mist and bone twisted into a hulking mass, claws like broken shale, eyes glowing like molten embers. That's bad, Rhys muttered, staggering back as it charged. Zarene lunged, her staff slashing in a crackling arc, but Thraxis was unstoppable. Its claws ripped into the tar, flinging molten globs that hissed where they landed. Run, she barked, and rebolted, his legs screaming with every stride. He didn't make it far. Thraxis swiped, a tendril of mist snaring his ankle, and he crashed down, tar scorching his palms. Zarene dove in, her staff slamming into its flank, but the beast roared, rearing again. She threw herself over Ree, her body crashing onto his. Her thighs locked around his hips, pinning him flat, and her chest crushed against his, her skin a blazing torrent that burned through his shirt. Her claws dug into his shoulders, raking slow and deep, and the heat surged, a wild, shuddering flood that tightened his core, his breath catching as her weight sank into him. "Don't move," she snarled, her lips grazing his jaw, her voice a raw hum that sent a jolt through him, and he gasped, "Can't think," voice ragged, torn between the fire and a reckless hunger. Thraxis lunged, and Zarene sprang up, striking its side with a burst of energy. Ree rolled free, tar sticking to his arms, and grabbed the seed. "Take this," he yelled, the sonic pulse slamming into the beast, staggering at mid-charge. He laughed, wild and breathless. "That's my new best friend." And Zarene shot him a glance, fierce and unreadable, as they scrambled back. The beast shook off the hit, its roar rattling the pits, and re-lurched to his feet, grinning despite the ache in his chest. "We're rocking this, right?" he panted, dodging a splash of tar. Zarene's tendrils whipped in the wind, her staff glowing brighter as she pressed forward. "It's not done," she said, her voice slicing through the chaos, and re-groaned, wiping muck from his face. "Yeah, it's a tough nut, kind of like you." The thickets loomed closer, their murmurs swelling like a chorus, and he gripped the seed tighter, its pulse pounding in his hands as they plunged into the fungal maze, Thraxis's snarl rolling through the steam. Rylan Ree, Kade barreled through the fungal thickets of Morvain, the veil seed a frantic buzz in his fist, its pulse throbbing like a war cry in his bones. The stalks loomed high, twisted and slick with a bitter sap that hissed faintly where it dripped, probably toxic because this planet loved a good kick in the teeth. Thraxis's snarl tore through the steam behind them, a primal roar that shook the earth, and Ree's boots skidded on the slick, mossy ground as he ran. Zarene surged ahead, her indigo form carving a path through the maze, tendrils flickering with that eerie glow. "Move, mortal!" she barked, her voice a rolling thunder that prickled his skin. "It's right behind us. Behind us." Ree wheezed, his bitten leg screaming with every step. "Thought we'd at least get a coffee break after that tar pit wrestle." He ducked a swaying stalk, its jagged tip grazing his shoulder with a sharp bite, and swore under his breath. The air was thick, a suffocating mix of rot and something pungent, like scorched bark, and the thickets buzzed, a low, insistent drone that gnawed at his nerves. Zarene didn't pause, her staff slashing at a rogue tendril that lunged from the shadows, its end snapping like a trap. "Thraxis doesn't wait," she said, her emerald eyes flashing back at him. "We falter, we're meat." "Awesome, a death race," Ree muttered, gripping the seed tighter. "My favorite sport." He stumbled after her, the beast's growl rattling his chest, and caught her silhouette, fierce and fluid, her tendrils slicing through the haze like living embers. She was a tempest, all sharp lines and relentless fire, and he couldn't stop the lopsided grin tugging at his lips. "You're a damn good wingman, Storm Eyes," he called, dodging another stalk. She shot him a glance, half scowl, half spark, and he laughed, ragged and raw. The thickets grew tighter, their drones swelling into a fevered hum, and Ree felt the seed's pulse quicken, sharper, louder, like it was clawing to break free. "This thing's getting chatty," he said, holding it up as they ran. "Maybe it's rooting for us to live." Zarene's gaze flicked to it, then hardened. "It's linked to Thraxis," she said. "My clan shaped it to call their purge. You've been it to defy them." Her tone carried a jagged edge, and he grinned. "Hell yeah, I'm all about sticking it to the pricks who burn my crew." His voice roughened, the memory a fresh scar, and her tendrils stilled for a breath, her eyes softening, just enough to sting. "Vengeance is a cruel anchor," she murmured, and he nodded, grim. Yeah, but it holds tight. They burst into a ragged clearing, a thin break in the fungal sprawl, and Thraxis crashed through behind them, a whirlwind of mist and bone ripping stalks apart like straw. Its claws gouged the ground, flinging clumps of steaming moss, and re-yelped, "Damn, it's fast." He dove left, rolling as a tendril lashed out, and Zarene met it head-on, her staff slamming into its flank with a burst of crackling light. The beast bellowed, swiping wide, and a claw grazed her arm. Indigo skin tore, a thin shimmer of blood welling up. "Zarene!" Rhys shouted, scrambling up, but she waved him off, her voice tight. "It's nothing, go." He didn't run far. The seed's pulse surged, climbing his throat like a shout begging to break loose. "Let's hit it again," he growled, pressing it to his lips. "Back off, you foggy bastard." The sonic blast ripped out, slamming into Thraxis's chest, and the beast stumbled, mist coiling inward. Chew on that." Rhys crowed, but the wind was short. Thraxis shook it off, its eyes flaring, and charged again. Zarene grabbed his arm, yanking him back, and they tumbled into a hollowed, fungal stump as the beast's claws slashed the air where he'd stood. Her body landed atop his, pinning him against the damp, spongy wall. Her thighs clamped his hips, fierce and unyielding, and her chest crushed into his, her heat a molten tide that seared through his shirt. Her claws dug into his shoulders, sinking deep, raking slow and deliberate down his chest, and the sensation crashed over him. A wild, shuddering blaze that flooded his core, tightening everything below his ribs. His breath snagged, a ragged gasp tearing free as her weight bore down, her curves pressing against him with a fierce, primal grip. Her lips hovered near his ear, her breath a sharp hum that sent a jolt through him, and she growled, "Stay down, you reckless fool." Her voice a raw edge that made his pulse slam. "Trying," he rasped, voice breaking under the strain, "but you're killing me." Her tendrils brushed his neck, soft and charged, and her emerald eyes locked on his, a flicker of something wild breaking her glare. "Idiot," she hissed, but her grip tightened, claws sliding lower, pressing into his ribs with a bruising force that sent a shiver racing down his spine. The heat coiled, a tight, dizzying pull, and he choked out, "You're going to snap me," his grin shaky, daring her to push harder. She lingered, a heartbeat too long, then sprang up, staff slashing at Thraxis as it lunged again. Re-rolled free, panting, the cool air shock against his scorched skin, and grabbed the seed. "Take 3, he yelled, the sonic pulse hitting Thraxis again, staggering at mid-charge. He laughed, wild and breathless. "Scream's my secret weapon." And Zarene shot him a look, fierce and unreadable, as they bolted from the stump. The beast's roar shook the thickets, but a new sound cut through, sharp, deliberate, a hum of storm energy. Shadows shifted ahead, and Zarene froze, her staff flaring brighter. "Clithia," she spat, and Rhys squinted as figures emerged. Vorynthai warriors, their indigo skin gleaming, staffs crackling with power. At their head stood Clithia, Zarene's sister, taller, colder, her tendrils spiked with jagged bone. "You cling to weakness, sister," she sneered, her voice a venomous hum. "This ape drags you down." Rhys smirked, stepping up. "Ape's got claws, sweetheart, try me." Zarene tensed, her staff glowing hotter. "You'd slaughter us both, Clithia," she said, her tone ice and fury. "For defying your bloodthirst." Clithia's eyes narrowed. "You're no kin, just a stain to wipe clean." She lunged, her staff slashing down, and Zarene met it, sparks exploding as their weapons clashed. The warriors surged, and Redove, rolling under a strike, his leg screamed, but he swung his blade, catching one in the shin. "Eat dirt, glow boy," he grunted, and the warriors stumbled, snarling. Thraxis roared behind them, drawn by the chaos, and the clearing erupted, beast and clan colliding in a maelstrom of rage. Reed dodged a claw, then a staff, and Zarene fought beside him, her movements a blur. A warrior seized his wrist, twisting hard, and she was there, Her body slammed into the attacker, knocking them back, but the force sent her crashing into Ree. She pinned him against a fungal stalk, her chest heaving against his. Her heat blazed through him, a searing rush that tightened his gut, and her claws slid down his chest, pressing deep in his ribs with a slow, bruising grip. His breath hitched, a sharp surge spiking through him as her thigh pressed against his, firm and electric, and she growled, "Hold steady," her lips grazing his neck, her voice a raw hum that made his head spin. "Doing my damnedest," he choked, half grinning through the haze, and she pulled back, her eyes blazing as she spun to strike again. The fight raged. Thraxis swiped, warriors lunged, and Ree swung the seed like a club, its pulse staggering foes. "Teamwork's our thing," he shouted, dodging a claw, and Zarene's staff cracked against Clithia's, forcing her back. The beast's roar mingled with the warrior's snarls, and Ree stumbled, moss and tar caking his hands, as they pushed deeper into the thickets, the chaos swirling around them like a living storm. Rylan Ree, Kade staggered through the fungal thickets of Morvain, the veil seed a frantic pulse in his hand, its rhythm a wild drumbeat syncing with his hammering heart. The air was thick with the beast's snarls and the warrior's shouts, a chaotic symphony that drowned out the thicket's eerie hum. Moss clung to his boots, slick and steaming, and every step jolted his bitten leg, sending sharp stabs of pain up his thigh. Zarene fought beside him, her indigo form a blur of motion, tendrils whipping through the haze like living sparks. "Stay close, mortal!" she barked, her voice a crackling roar that cut through the din. "We're not clear yet." "Clear," Ree rasped, ducking a fumble stalk that swayed too close. "I'm just trying not to be lunch." He swung his blade at a Vorynthai warrior lunging from the shadows, catching their staff mid-strike. The impact rattled his arm, but the warriors stumbled back, snarling. Thraxis loomed behind them, a storm of mist and bone tearing through the thickets, its claws shredding stalks into pulpy ruin. The air stank of charred sap and blood, a bitter tang that coated his throat, and Ree grinned, wild and unhinged. "This is the worst camping trip ever, Storm Eyes," he panted, dodging a claw that gouged the ground beside him. Zarene's staff flared, slamming into Thraxis's flank with a burst of light, and the beast roared, its eyes blazing crimson. "Focus!" she snapped, her tendrils flaring brighter. "Clithia's warriors won't relent, and neither will it." She spun, parrying a strike from her sister, Clithia, whose staff crackled with venomous energy. The sisters clashed, a storm of fury and light, and Ree darted to the side, the seed pulsing harder in his grip. "This thing's begging to scream," he muttered, feeling its buzz climb his throat. "Let's give a voice." He pressed it to his lips and bellowed, "Back off, you oversized smoke show." The sonic blast ripped out, slamming into Thraxis and staggering at mid-charge, mist curling inward like a wounded beast. "Nice trick," Zarene called, her voice sharp over the chaos, and Ree grinned, breathless. "I'm full of surprises, stick around." But the warriors closed in, their staffs slashing through the haze, and Clithia's sneer cut through the fray. "You shield this weakling, sister," she spat, her tendrils spiked with bone. "He'll drag you to ruin." Zarene's eyes blazed, her staff meeting Clithia's with a crack that shook the air. "He fights where you'd flee," she snarled, and Ree felt a jolt. Not pain, but pride, raw and fierce. "Ah, Storm Eyes, you're sweet on me," he quipped, dodging a warrior's lunge. The thickets gave way to a jagged rift, a tear in Morvain's surface leading to Silthera, a hidden planet shimmering below. The ground sloped sharply, a steep drop lined with luminous fungal groves and vapor lakes that glowed with an eerie calm, a stark contrast to the chaos above. "Down there," Zarene shouted, shoving Ree toward the edge. He stumbled, boots slipping on the slick moss, and she grabbed his waist, yanking him back. Her chest slammed into his back, her heat searing through his shirt, a blazing rush that flooded his spine. Her claws dug into his hips, pressing deep into muscle with a fierce grip, and his breath hitched, a sharp surge spiking through him as her body molded against his firm, unyielding, her breath a low hum against his neck. "Move, fool," she growled, her voice a rumble that tightened his gut, but her fingers lingered, sliding slow and hard along his side, sending a shiver racing through him. "You're distracting," he rasped, half laughing through the strain, and her emerald eyes flashed, daring him to push back. They slid down the slope, Thraxis's roar echoing above, and hit Silthera's surface in a tangle of limbs. Ree landed hard, vapor rising from the warm, glassy ground, and Zarene rolled atop him, pinning him flat. Her thighs locked around his hips, tight and commanding, and her chest crushed against his, her heat a molten tide that burned through his shirt. Her claws raked his shoulders, sinking deep, pressing slow and deliberate into his flesh, and a sensation crashed over him, a wild, shuddering blaze that flooded his core, tightening everything below his ribs. His breath snagged, a ragged gasp tearing free as her weight bore down, her curves pressing against him with a primal, unrelenting force. Her lips hovered near his jaw, her breath a sharp hum that sent a jolt through him, and she growled, "Get up! Damn you!" Her voice a raw edge that made his pulse slam. "Trying," he choked, voice cracking under the heat. "But you're too good at this." Her tendrils brushed his cheek, soft and charged, and her eyes locked on his, a flicker of fire breaking her glare. Thraxis crashed down behind them, its claws gouging the glowing earth, and Zarene sprang up, staff slashing at its flank. Ree rolled free, vapor stinging his lungs, and gripped the seed. "Time to sing," he yelled, the sonic pulse hitting Thraxis square, staggering it again. "Loud's my game," he laughed, wild and reckless, and Zarene shot him a glance, fierce, almost proud, as they scrambled back. The beast shook off the hit, its roar rattling the groves, and Clithia's warriors descended, their staffs glowing through the mist. "You can't flee this," Clithia shouted, her voice a venomous hum, and Ree smirked, wiping blood from his arm. "Watch me, Bone Lady." Zarene clashed with her sister again, their staffs sparking, and Ree darted to a nearby vapor lake, its surface rippling with heat. "Hey, Storm Eyes," he called. "This stuff flammable?" She parried Clithia's strike, her eyes flicking to him, and nodded, catching his plan. He scooped a handful of the shimmering liquid. It burned his skin, a sharp sting, and hurled it at Thraxis's feet as Zarene struck her staff down, igniting it. Flames erupted, licking up the beast's legs, and it roared, thrashing in the blaze. The warriors recoiled, and re-laughed, manic and breathless. "Grills on assholes," he shouted, dodging a claw as Thraxis lunged through the fire. Clithia's staff slashed at Zarene, drawing a thin line of blood across her cheek, and Ree's grin faded. "Hey!" he barked, charging in. His blade caught Clithia's arm, forcing her back, and Zarene seized the moment, her staff slamming into her sister's chest. "You envied me," Zarene snarled, her voice raw with fury. "Cut me out for it." Clithia stumbled, her eyes cold. "You're nothing," she spat, lunging again, and the fight blurred into a storm of light and rage. Ree swung the seed, its pulse staggering a warrior mid-strike, and ducked as Thraxis's claw grazed his shoulder, tearing fabric and skin. Blood dripped down his arm, mixing with the vapor, and he stumbled, the seeds hum a steady beat in his hand. Zarene fought beside him, her breath ragged, and they pushed through the groves, the beast and warriors pressing in from all sides, the air thick with heat and the scent of burning moss. Rylan Kade lurched through the glowing fumble groves of Silthera, the veil seed a restless thrum in his fist, its pulse clawing at his nerves like a caged beast. The air trembled with Thraxis's guttural howls and the warrior's sharp cries, a violent cacophony drowning the grove's whispers. Vapor hissed from the glassy ground, scorching his throat with every labored breath, and blood seeped from his torn shoulder, trailing hot and slicked down his arm. Zarene moved beside him, her indigo form a storm of precision, tendrils snapping through the mist like charged whips. "Drive on, mortal!" she hissed, her voice a low growl laced with urgency, slicing through the chaos. "We break it here, or it breaks us. Break us!" Rhys snarled, his voice rough with exhaustion as he swung his blade at a Vorynthai warrior lunging from the haze. The staff grazed his side, a stinging bite, but he rammed his elbow into their chest, shoving them back with a grunt. "I'm running on fumes here." Thraxis towered ahead, its mist and bone mass surging through the flames, no longer slashing but hurling jagged shards of fungal debris, each one a missile that splintered the earth into glowing craters. The air reeked of burnt moss and acrid vapor, a sour punch to his senses, and Rhys bared his teeth, fury replacing his usual grin. "This is your damn mess, Storm Eyes. Let's clean it up." Zarene's staff lashed out, cracking against Thraxis's flank with a burst of searing light, and the beast shrieked, a high, piercing wail that rattled his skull. "Hold your ground," she snapped, her tendrils flaring with a wild shimmer. "Clithia's dogs won't back off, and neither will this thing." She pivoted, meeting her sister's strike head-on, Clithia's staff humming with a dark, crackling force. Their clash erupted in a flurry of sparks, and Rhys staggered back, the seed's pulse surging up his arm. "This thing's itching to fight," he muttered, gripping it tighter. "Let's give it teeth." He slammed it against his blade, the impact unleashing a jagged sonic ripple that tore through the air, splintering a fungal stalk and crashing into Thraxis's side. Its mist shuddered, recoiling like a wounded thing. Zarene's head snapped toward him, her tendrils lashing the air, a sharp hiss escaping her lips, a sound of raw approval that cut through the din. Grunted, chest heaving, no laughter left in him. "Stick that in your storm pipes," he spat, but the warriors pressed harder, their staffs slicing through the vapor, and Clithia's voice rang out, cold and venomous. "You're a blind sister," she sneered, her bone-spiked tendrils quivering. "This apes a chain around your neck." Zarene's staff met hers with a bone-jarring crack, her voice a snarl of defiance. "He's steel where you're ash." Rhys' jaw tightened, a flicker of grim resolve flaring in his gut. Not pride this time, but something heavier, forged in blood. Thraxis reared, its mist coiling into a churning vortex, and launched a barrage of fungal shards. Rhys ducked, but one grazed his thigh, slicing deep. He stumbled, vapor scalding his palms as he caught himself, and Zarene surged forward, her staff driving into the beast's core. It shrieked, tendrils of mist whipping wildly, and one snagged her leg, yanking her off balance. Rhys lunged, no quips, just a raw yell tearing from his throat as he threw himself at her. His body crashed into hers, knocking her free. They hit the ground hard, tangled and breathless, her frame pinning him against the steaming earth, her hips pressed into his, a fierce, unyielding weight, and her claws slid down his sides, digging deep into his waist, raking slow and hard through the muscle. The heat hit like a flood, a blistering, shuddering rush that coiled tight in his core, his breath snagging as her curves crushed against him, firm and electric. Her face hovered close, her breath a hot gust against his neck, and she growled, "You're mine to keep alive," her voice a low rumble that sent a jolt through his spine, raw and possessive. "Barely," he rasped, voice cracking, caught between the burn and a reckless ache, her tendrils grazing his jaw with a charged sting. Thraxis loomed, its vortex tightening, and Zarene shoved off him, her staff slashing upward in a burst of light that split the mist. Rhys rolled to his knees, vapor stinging his eyes, and hefted the seed. "Let's carve it up," he snarled, smashing into the ground. The sonic wave erupted outward, a low, grinding hum that shook the groves and staggered Thraxis mid-spin. Zarene's staff flared brighter, and she drove it into the beast's flank, splitting its form. Mist bled out, dissipating in shrieks of fading fury. Rhys lurched to his feet, blood and vapor blurring his vision, and spat at the dying beast. "Stay down, you foggy prick." Clithia's warriors surged, staffs crackling. and her voice cut through the haze. "Your blood stains this dawn," she roared, lunging at Zarene. Ree darted to a vapor lake, its glow pulsing with heat, and scooped a handful of the shimmering liquid. His skin blistered, a sharp hiss escaping him as he flung it at Clythia's feet. Zarene struck her staff down, igniting it. Flames roared up, engulfing Clythia's legs, and she stumbled, shrieking. Recharged, blade slashing her arm, and Zarene drove forward, her staff pinning her sister to the earth. "You envied my defiance," Zarene growled, her voice a blade of fury, "and it ends you." Clythia's warriors froze, then scattered, fleeing into the mist as Thraxis's last wisp faded, the flames licking its ruin. Ree slumped, blood pooling beneath him, and Zarene turned, her breath heavy. She stepped close, her hands sliding under his jaw, claws pressing firm against his throat. Her heat sank into him, a slow, searing pulse that tightened his chest. "You're a fool," she murmured, her voice softer now, edged with something raw. "Yeah," he croaked, a faint smirk tugging his lips, "but I'm your fool." Her tendrils brushed his face, lingering, and they turned to the vapor lake, its light softening as the chaos stilled. Silthera stretched ahead, a scarred prize won in fire, and Ree leaned into her grip, the seed silent in his hand as they moved forward, the air thick with ash and the faint hum of a new beginning.